The Middle Ages was one of the darkest and most brutal periods in history. From churches made of human bones to strange events that still can't be explained to this day. Join me as we uncover some of the darkest secrets and most shocking discoveries left behind by the Middle Ages. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe. It means a lot to us content creators. Thank you. And now let's get started. Dancing plague in France. On July 15, 1518, a woman named Frau Trophea suddenly started dancing in a street in Strasbourg. There was no music, no celebration, and no clear reason. She danced for several hours, then all night long. The next day, she still didn't stop. After a week, more than 30 people were dancing along with her. By August, the number had grown. For almost 4 days, hundreds of men, women, and children danced non-stop in the streets. Many of them developed wounds on their feet and collapsed from exhaustion. And according to records from that time, some even died from stroke or heart failure. What's even stranger is that the authorities did not stop them. Instead, the city council believed that the victims just needed to release their illness through dancing. They even built a stage and hired musicians to encourage the dancers even more. But this didn't help. The strange epidemic continued for almost 2 months before it gradually disappeared. Until now, there is still no definite explanation as to why it happened. Some say it was caused by a fungus in the grain, while others believe it was a mass psychological phenomenon worsened by hunger, disease, and fear that were widespread in the region at that time. More than 5 centuries have passed, yet it remains one of the strangest mysteries in the history of Europe. Medieval animal trials. Between the 13th and 18th centuries, there was a strange tradition in Europe, putting animals on trial. And this was not a joke or just a symbolic ritual. There were real courts, judges, lawyers, witnesses, and formal verdicts. In 1386 in Normandy, a pig was put on trial for attacking a child. It was even given its own lawyer before being finally sentenced. In 1587, a community in France filed a case against beetles that were destroying their vineyards. The case lasted for 8 months, and the insects even had a lawyer. One of the most unusual cases happened in Basel, Switzerland, in 1474. A rooster was put on trial for allegedly laying an egg. At that time, people believed that a rooster's egg could give rise to a monster called a basilisk. From a modern perspective, this seems laughable, but for people during the Middle Ages, the law was part of the divine order of the world. They believed that all creatures were under God's law and could be held accountable for their actions. For them, the idea of a world without reason was more frightening than putting an animal on trial. Witch bottles. More than 200 strange bottles have been found under fireplaces, doors, and walls of old houses in England. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary bottles. But when archaeologists opened some of them, they discovered terrifying contents: twisted nails, needles, human hair, cut nails, and even human urine. These are called witch bottles. According to beliefs back then, these bottles served as protection against witches and curses. The urine represents the person believed to be cursed. The needles and nails are said to absorb the curse as it approaches the victim. In some bottles, a small heart made of cloth or leather was found, pierced with needles. This is said to symbolize the witch herself, and hurting it is believed to force her to lift the curse. In 2004, researchers examined a witch bottle from Greenwich that was over 300 years old. Inside it, they found human urine, nails, needles, and 10 fingernail clippings. Surprisingly, the curse could even be identified, as it was found that the person who put the urine in the bottle was a smoker because of the traces of nicotine left in it. Until now, archaeologists continue to find witch bottles under old buildings. In a time without modern science, without medicine for most illnesses, and when daily life was full of dangers, belief in witchcraft seemed as real as anything around them. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part of this story. It's not about whether witch bottles actually worked, but about how many people believed they needed them to survive. Anchorite cell, England. During the renovation of some medieval churches in England, small rooms were discovered hidden within the thick walls of the church itself. These rooms had no doors. There was only a small window, just big enough for food to pass through, and a narrow slit facing the altar. These rooms are called Anchorite cells. Here, some religious men and women voluntarily locked themselves up to live alone for the rest of their lives. When an Anchorite was about to enter his cell, a special ceremony was performed by the bishop. This included prayers usually read for the dead. In the eyes of the church, that person was considered dead to the world. After this, the cell was closed and he would never come out again. He would never see the sky again. He would never be touched by another person. And sometimes he would never again move more than a few steps from where he stood. Food was only passed through a small hole in the wall. Through this, he could also hear the Mass and see the altar. One of the most famous anchorites was Julian of Norwich. For more than 20 years, she stayed in her small room while writing the book Revelations of Divine Love, one of the oldest books in English written by a woman. When modern renovators opened some of the cells, they even found traces of the people who once lived there, scratches on the stone, parts of personal belongings. This was not a prison, nor was it a punishment. This was a life of complete solitude, voluntarily chosen by people who believed they could get closer to God by withdrawing from the whole world. Bone Church. In the town of Kutna Hora, in the Czech Republic, there is a small chapel known as the Sedlec Ossuary. At first glance, it looks like just an ordinary old Gothic building, similar to many other historic churches in Europe. But once you step inside, you'll quickly notice that there's something unusual about it. The decorations surrounding the walls, as well as some sculptures and symbols that can be seen inside. All of these are made from real human bones, not replicas, not decorations that just look like bones, but the actual remains of people who once lived. Hundreds of years have passed, and it is estimated that between 40 to 70,000 skeletons were used inside this chapel. Here you can see skulls carefully arranged to form arches and decorations. There are pillars surrounded by bones, and in the center of the chapel hangs a huge chandelier that is said to contain almost every type of bone found in the human body. For most modern visitors, this site seems like something straight out of a horror movie. But what's even more surprising is that this isn't the only place like this in Europe. In Portugal, you can find the famous Chapel of Bones in the city of Évora. There, thousands upon thousands of skeletons were used to cover the walls and pillars of the entire chapel. Above the entrance, there's a message written that immediately catches the attention of visitors. "We bones here are waiting for you too." A simple sentence. But it's also a strong reminder that no one can escape death. So how did this unusual tradition begin? During the Middle Ages, the population of many towns and cities in Europe grew rapidly. Along with this came an increase in burials in church cemeteries. Then came epidemics, famines, and plagues like the Black Death that claimed millions of lives. Before long, many cemeteries became full. People needed to make space for new burials. Because of this, old remains were exhumed, cleaned, and transferred to ossuaries or bone storage areas. But in some places, these bones were not simply stored away. Instead, they were made part of the church itself. The skulls and bones were carefully arranged to create designs, decorations, and religious symbols. Although this may seem frightening from a modern perspective, it was not done to scare people. In fact, its purpose was the opposite. This tradition is rooted in an important concept in Christianity called Memento Mori, a Latin phrase that means remember that you will die. For people during the medieval period, reflecting on death was not considered strange or morbid. It was an important part of faith. They believed that remembering the temporary nature of life helps people live more meaningfully and closer to God. So instead of hiding death, they placed it right in front of their eyes. With every entrance to the church, every prayer, and every mass, those bones reminded them that one day their time would also come. People around them would eventually become just like those bones. And perhaps that's why the impact of the bone churches remains so powerful even today. Every year, many tourists visit these places. Many of them enter simply out of curiosity. But once inside, they often fall silent because they slowly realize that what they're looking at isn't just decoration. It's not just art. These are real people. People who once lived, loved, dreamed, and existed just like us. And even after hundreds of years have passed, they still remain a part of those churches. They stand silently as a reminder of a truth that has never changed. Empires may rise and fall. Kingdoms may disappear, and names may be erased from history. But for the people who built these bone churches, there is one thing that is certain for everyone, that someday each one of us will also become part of the past. And that is the message that thousands of skulls and bones on the walls of these chapels continue to whisper to this day. And its name comes from the French word oublier, which means to forget. And that is exactly its purpose, not just to imprison a person, but to erase them from people's memory. For many years, while renovating and inspecting old castles in Europe, strange pits have been found hidden beneath towers, halls, and the foundations of ancient buildings. At first glance, it seems like just an ordinary part of the structure. But as archaeologists examine them more closely, they realize that some of them may have been used as secret prisons. In 2009, renovators in Nottingham, England, discovered a medieval obelisk underneath a building that had served as a courthouse for more than 600 years. According to some reports, the people placed here could be left in the dark with no hope of escape. In Ireland, at the famous Leap Castle, a similar pit was discovered. In other castles, the floor of the oubliette is uneven and filled with sharp stones. It wasn't made to be comfortable. It was made to make every hour spent inside even harder. Imagine the feeling of a person who fell into a place like this. Complete darkness, cold stone walls, no way to climb out, and only a small opening above connects you to the world. As the days pass, you might still hear the footsteps of people above, the conversations, the sound of life, but none of them can see you, and no one knows if you are still alive. However, there are historians who believe that not all of what are now called oubliettes were actually used as prisons. Some may have once been cisterns, warehouses, or simply part of the original design of the castle that later gained a darker reputation. But one thing is undeniable. In some of these pits, real human bones have been found. And that's enough for people to ask what really happened in those places hundreds of years ago. What's terrifying about the oubliette is not just the possibility of hunger, suffering, or death. The concept behind it is even more frightening. The idea that there are places intentionally made to remove a person from the sight of the world, the sealed vaults beneath Edinburgh. In 1985, a rugby player in Edinburgh accidentally broke an old wall and fell into a dark space beneath the city. What he discovered was not just a simple basement. It was a vast network of rooms hidden beneath the South Bridge, and it had been forgotten for almost a century. More than 120 vaults were found. At first, these were used as workshops, storage rooms, and places of business. But as time passed, water began to leak from the bridge above. The businessmen abandoned the place. They were replaced by the poorest residents of Edinburgh, migrants with nowhere to stay, families who couldn't afford to rent a house, people who had nowhere else to go. Inside the vaults, there was almost no sunlight. There was no proper ventilation and no sanitation. Disease, poverty, and desperation became part of their daily lives. When the city finally closed the entrances, in the 19th century, the whole place was gradually forgotten. For more than 100 years, Most residents of Edinburgh had no idea that there was once an entire community that lived and suffered right beneath their feet. When the vaults were reopened, archaeologists found tools, pieces of clothing, animal bones, containers, and other traces of the people who once lived there. Today it is a popular tourist attraction and is often considered one of the most haunted places in Scotland. But the truly frightening part of the story is not the ghosts, but the fact that there were people who once lived, suffered, and died beneath the city and were almost completely erased from history. Medieval cesspit archaeology. One of the most important sources of information about real life during the Middle Ages is not found in castles, churches, or ancient books, but in old sewers and cesspits. It may not be pleasant to think about, but for archaeologists, medieval cesspits or latrines are like time capsules of daily life. When organic materials fall into a sealed pit, an environment without oxygen, they do not decompose right away. Instead, they can remain preserved for hundreds of years. Because of this, researchers have discovered fruit seeds, pollen, animal hides, cloth, shoes, and even parasites that once lived in the bodies of people. In York, England, ancient human feces were found containing eggs of roundworm, whipworm, and other parasites. This showed that intestinal infections were widespread during the medieval period. In Germany, a cesspit contained more than 30,000 cherry pits. And in Paris, traces of grapes and wine were discovered, proving how important wine was in their diet. Back when most water was unsafe to drink, studying old sewers wasn't glamorous. But there's one thing that many old documents can't do. It doesn't lie. While the chronicles of the time often focused on kings, wars, and religion, cesspits show what ordinary people really ate, what diseases they carried, and how they lived day to day. London plague pits. In 2013, while building London's new underground railway, workers discovered something under Liverpool Street: human bones, and not just one or two, but hundreds. As the excavation continued, they discovered that they had uncovered a vast mass grave from the time of the plague. Beneath the modern city lie the victims of the Black Death in 1348 and the Great Plague in 1665. At Charterhouse Square, archaeologists found a long-lost emergency cemetery that was opened during the time of the Black Death. Through DNA testing of the teeth from the skeletons, scientists confirmed the presence of the bacteria that caused the plague. This is the same disease that killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. The analysis of the bones also showed where these people grew up, what they ate during their youth, and what kind of work they did before they died. Many of them were not born in London. They were workers and migrants who came to the city to look for a livelihood. There were children. There were poor people. There were people who died so quickly that they had to be buried in large numbers. The bodies were not properly arranged. Instead, they were piled on top of each other inside the graves, proof of how severe the disaster the city faced was. In total, more than 3,000 graves were discovered in different parts of the project. For more than 600 years, these people remained buried beneath the streets and train stations. And when they were rediscovered, modern London gained a direct connection to one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. The people in the pit were not kings or nobles. They were ordinary people who died in a crisis that changed all of Europe. Richard III was found under a parking lot in August 2012. The archaeologists in Leicester started digging in a simple parking lot. They were not looking for treasure. They were not looking for an ancient temple either. What they were searching for was the tomb of a king who had been missing for more than 5 centuries. Richard III, the last king of England to die on the battlefield. He was killed in the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, a battle that ended the Wars of the Roses and paved the way for the rise of the Tudor dynasty. After his death, he was buried in a monastery in Leicester. But when the monastery was demolished a few decades later, the location of his grave was completely lost. For 527 years, no one knew where he was buried. After the first day of digging in the parking lot, the archaeologists found a skeleton. The body was lying in a shallow and cramped grave. Its spine had clear scoliosis, a condition that matches historical descriptions of Richard III. There were also many wounds on the skull caused by weapons used in medieval warfare, but the most important evidence came from DNA. Scientists compared the genetic material from the skeleton to the DNA of a living descendant of one of Richard III's siblings. There was a match. After thorough examination, it was officially confirmed that the skeleton belonged to Richard III. This is one of the most remarkable discoveries in modern archaeology. For many centuries, the image of Richard III was shaped by propaganda and stories, especially by Shakespeare's play, which portrayed him as severely deformed. But science has shown that many parts of that story were exaggerated or untrue. An even more astonishing detail is that the parking space where he was found was marked with the letter R. It wasn't put there for the king. It just so happened that it meant reserved. For many decades, thousands of people parked their cars over the missing King of England without knowing it. In 2015, Richard III was reburied at Leicester Cathedral in a ceremony attended by many people. After more than 500 years of being lost, a king once forgotten by history was finally found again. And one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of modern times came to an end. And that concludes our journey through some of the most disturbing discoveries from the Middle Ages. And when they were opened, they gave us a rare opportunity to hear once again the voices of people who have long been lost to history.